Good evening. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are covering what may be the most dangerous escalation in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The United States and Israel have launched a joint military attack on Iran, and Iran has responded with missile and drone strikes targeting not just Israel, but American military installations across the Persian Gulf. This is not a drill. This is not a proxy war. This is direct state-on-state warfare between nuclear-armed powers and a nation of 90 million people. If you're watching mainstream coverage right now, you're getting sanitized Pentagon talking points. We're going to give you what they won't.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Let's be absolutely clear about the sequence of events here, because the order matters and the mainstream framing is already distorting it. The United States and Israel struck first. They launched attacks on Iranian territory on Saturday. Iran then responded, as it had been publicly warning it would do for months. But if you turn on cable news right now, the cheerins read Iran attacks U.S. bases as if Tehran woke up and decided to start a war. That is not what happened. The aggression originated from Washington and Tel Aviv, and every honest analyst covering this region knows it. South China Morning Post reported the sequence correctly. Most American outlets have not.
Let's dig into what Iran actually did in response, because the scale tells you how seriously Tehran is taking this. According to the South China Morning Post, Iran first launched a wave of missiles and drones targeting Israel directly. Then came strikes on U.S. military installations in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. Shrapnel from an Iranian missile attack on the capital of the United Arab Emirates killed at least one person, according to state media. Both the UAE and Iraq shut down their airspace entirely. We are talking about the entire Persian Gulf region becoming an active war zone overnight. Commercial aviation grounded. Gulf states that tried desperately to stay neutral are now caught in the crossfire.
And here's a detail that should be dominating every broadcast but isn't getting the weight it deserves. Middle East I published footage showing an Iranian drone striking the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. The Fifth Fleet headquarters, Alex. That is the nerve center of American naval operations in the entire Persian Gulf. This is not a symbolic strike on some empty airfield in the desert. This is Iran demonstrating that it can reach the most critical American military infrastructure in the region. The strategic implications of that single strike are enormous, and yet I've seen more coverage tonight about stock futures than about a direct hit on a major U.S. command center.
Let's talk about who is driving this war and why, because this didn't materialize out of thin air. Middle East I published a critical opinion piece arguing that the Trump-Netanyahu war aims to entrap Iranians into unconditional submission. That framing is essential. This is not about nuclear nonproliferation. This is not about defending democracy. This is about two leaders, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, who both have enormous domestic political incentives to escalate, pursuing a maximalist strategy designed to force Iran into total capitulation. Not negotiation. Not compromise. Unconditional submission. And if you understand that objective, everything else about this conflict snaps into focus.
Exactly right. Netanyahu has been pushing for a U.S.-Iran confrontation for literally decades. This has been the strategic white whale of Israeli hawks since the 1990s. Netanyahu could never take on Iran alone because Iran is not Gaza, it's not Lebanon, it's a massive nation with serious military capabilities and strategic depth across the entire region. He needed the United States to fight this war for him. And now he has a willing partner in Trump, who tore up the Iran nuclear deal in his first term, reimposed crushing sanctions, assassinated Qasem Soleimani, and has surrounded himself with Iran hawks who view regime change in Tehran as unfinished business from the Bush era.
And let's connect the domestic politics here because they are inseparable from the war-making. Netanyahu faces ongoing corruption trials and has been governing through a far-right coalition that includes outright settler extremists who openly call for ethnic cleansing. War is his political oxygen. Every escalation rallies the Israeli public around the flag and makes it harder for opponents to challenge him. Trump, meanwhile, has his own reasons. A wartime president commands a different kind of authority. A major military campaign reshapes the news cycle entirely. And both leaders share something critical: they benefit from a conflict that is too big to walk back from, because once American troops are under fire, the political space for de-escalation collapses.
Now here's what the mainstream press absolutely will not tell you. The people who suffer most from this are ordinary Iranians, ordinary Gulf state citizens, and ordinary American service members. The architect class, the Netanyahus and the Trumps, they don't bear any of the cost. And there's a crucial detail that Middle East I reported that demolishes the narrative that this is somehow about liberating the Iranian people from their government. Bahrain Farjani, who is an exiled Iranian political analyst and an opponent of the Islamic Republic, someone who has actively worked against the Iranian government, publicly condemned the US-Israeli attack. Let that sink in. Even people who oppose the Iranian regime are saying this is wrong.
That detail is devastating to the interventionist narrative. The standard playbook, and we saw it with Iraq, we saw it with Libya, is to claim that military action is being taken on behalf of the oppressed population. We're liberating them. But when an actual Iranian dissident, someone who has every reason to want the Islamic Republic gone, comes out and says this attack is unjustifiable, it exposes the liberation rhetoric as the propaganda it is. Farjani understands what the war planners in Washington either don't understand or don't care about: bombing a country doesn't liberate its people. It rallies them around their government. Every bomb dropped on Iran strengthens the hardliners and weakens the reformists.
And that's not speculation. That is the historical pattern, confirmed over and over. When Iraq invaded Iran in 1980, it was the external threat that consolidated the Islamic Republic's power in its most vulnerable early years. When Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions, it destroyed the political credibility of Iranian moderates like Rouhani, who had staked their reputations on diplomacy with the West. The Iranian hardliners said all along that America couldn't be trusted, and Trump proved them right. Now we're seeing the same dynamic amplified 100-fold. If you are a young Iranian who was protesting the morality police 2 years ago, and now American and Israeli bombs are falling on your country, who do you rally behind?
Let's talk about the regional reaction, because it reveals how isolated the US-Israel position actually is. Al Jazeera is tracking global responses, and the picture is damning. The European Union is calling for maximum restraint, which is diplomatic language for, this is reckless and we want no part of it. Oman, which has been a critical mediator between the US and Iran for years, explicitly warned the United States not to get sucked in further. Oman is a close American partner. This isn't an adversary issuing that warning. This is a friend saying you are making a catastrophic mistake. When your own allies are publicly distancing themselves, that tells you everything about the legitimacy of your actions.
And look at what's happening to the Gulf states that host American bases. Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, these countries did not sign up for this. They host U.S. military facilities under security agreements premised on the idea that the American presence provides stability. Now that presence has made them targets. An Iranian missile hit the UAE capital and killed someone. Airspace across the region is shut down. The economic disruption alone is staggering. These are countries whose entire economies run on trade, energy exports, and aviation connectivity. All of that is now at risk because the United States decided to launch a war from their territory without, let's be honest, meaningful consultation about the consequences they would bear.
This brings us to a pattern we've documented on this show many times. The United States uses its global military footprint to pursue wars of choice, and the host nations bear disproportionate consequences. It happened with Turkey and the Iraq War. It happened with Pakistan and the Afghanistan War. Now it's happening with the Gulf states and Iran. These countries become collateral damage in American strategic adventures. And the cruel irony is that when Iran retaliates against US bases in their territory, the framing becomes, Iran attacked Bahrain or Iran attacked Kuwait, as if these nations were the aggressors rather than unwilling platforms for someone else's war.
Let's zoom out to the strategic picture, because what's unfolding is not just a Middle East crisis, it's a potential global catastrophe. Iran is not Iraq circa 2003. It has not been weakened by a decade of sanctions and no-fly zones to the point of military impotence. Iran has a battle-hardened military, sophisticated missile technology that has now demonstrably reached major U.S. installations, drone capabilities that are clearly advanced enough to strike the Fifth Fleet headquarters, and proxy networks across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. A full-scale war with Iran would make the Iraq War look like a contained skirmish. We are talking about a conflict that could engulf the entire region from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean.
And nobody in a position of authority in Washington seems to be asking the most basic question: what is the endgame? With Iraq, at least the architects had a theory, a delusional one, but a theory, that regime change would produce a democratic ally. What is the theory with Iran? A country of 90 million people, with a civilizational identity stretching back thousands of years, with genuine national pride that transcends political faction. Are we going to occupy Iran? With what army? For how long? At what cost? The Pentagon can't even recruit enough soldiers to maintain current force levels. The strategic illiteracy of this escalation would be comical if the human cost weren't going to be measured in hundreds of thousands of lives.
The opinion piece in Middle East makes a critical argument that I want to highlight. It describes the strategy as entrapment, specifically entrapping Iranians into unconditional submission. That word, entrapment, is precise and important. Because what's being constructed is a situation where Iran has no acceptable options. If Iran submits to every demand, it ceases to exist as a sovereign state making its own decisions. If Iran resists, it gives the hawks in Washington and Tel Aviv the justification for further escalation. If Iran retaliates, as it just did, the narrative shifts to see, Iran is the aggressor. Every path leads to more war. That's not diplomacy. That's a trap.
And we need to talk about who benefits financially from this escalation, because following the money always reveals the architecture of power. Defense stocks surge every time tensions with Iran spike. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, these companies have spent hundreds of millions lobbying Congress and funding think tanks that advocate for exactly the kind of confrontational Iran policy we're seeing. The same think tanks that pushed for the Iraq War, many staffed by the same people, have been producing papers calling for military strikes on Iran for 20 years. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are publicly available lobbying disclosures, board memberships, and revolving door appointments between the Pentagon, defense contractors, and the policy establishment.
And energy markets. Let's not ignore the obvious. The Persian Gulf is the choke point for roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply. Every escalation sends crude prices skyrocketing. Who benefits from that? Certainly not American consumers paying $6 a gallon. But oil companies posting record profits? Absolutely. Gulf monarchies that can leverage scarcity? Absolutely. Russia, which funds its war in Ukraine largely through energy exports and benefits enormously from anything that disrupts Gulf supply? Absolutely. The people making the decisions to escalate this conflict either directly profit from the chaos or are aligned with interests that do. That is not a coincidence. That is the system functioning exactly as designed.
Let's come back to the human dimension, because it gets lost in the geopolitical chess game. Iranian civilians are now under bombardment from the most powerful military alliance on earth. The people in Tehran, in Isfahan, in Shiraz, these are teachers, doctors, students, shopkeepers, parents, the same people who filled the streets demanding reform and women's rights. They didn't ask for this war. They are not the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. But they will die just the same when American precision munitions, which are only precise in press releases, start hitting their neighborhoods. We know from every modern war that civilian casualties are inevitable and always higher than what the Pentagon admits.
And American service members stationed across the Gulf are now in active danger, not because of any threat Iran posed to the American homeland, but because of a policy choice made in Washington. The troops at the 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain who just had a drone hit their base, the personnel at installations in Kuwait and Qatar who are now under missile attack, they were deployed there on a security mission. Now they're combat targets in a war they had no say in initiating. When politicians and pundits talk about supporting the troops, ask them why they supported sending those troops into harm's way for a war of choice that serves the political interests of two leaders and the financial interests of the defense industry.
I want to address something that is going to dominate the discourse in the coming days, and it's the framing of anyone who questions this war as being pro-Iran or anti-Israel. We've seen this playbook before. If you opposed the Iraq War, you were accused of supporting Saddam. If you question this escalation, you'll be called a supporter of the Islamic Republic. This is a deliberate strategy to shut down democratic debate at the exact moment it matters most. You can believe the Iranian government is repressive and also believe that bombing Iran is wrong. You can support Israel's right to exist and also believe that Netanyahu is a war criminal pursuing reckless policies. These are not contradictions. They are basic moral reasoning.
And let's talk about what the media is doing right now, because media criticism is central to what we do on this show. Right now, across the major networks, you are seeing retired generals and former intelligence officials presented as objective analysts. These people are on the boards of defense contractors. They have consulting contracts with firms that profit from war. They are not disclosed as such. This is the same failure that happened before the Iraq War, which the New York Times itself later admitted and apologized for. 23 years later, the same papers, the same networks, the same revolving door of military-industrial voices are being platformed as neutral experts. The institutional memory lasts exactly as long as it's convenient.
The Oman warning deserves more attention. Oman told the United States, according to Al Jazeera's reporting on global reactions, not to get sucked in further. Oman has been the quiet diplomatic bridge between Washington and Tehran for decades. They facilitated the back channel that led to the Iran nuclear deal. When Oman issues a public warning like that, it means the diplomatic community sees a catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. It means the off-ramps that existed even a week ago are being destroyed. Every missile, every drone, every retaliatory strike narrows the window for negotiation. And the people pushing this war know that. Destroying the possibility of diplomacy is a feature, not a bug.
Consider the legal dimension as well, which no one on television seems interested in discussing. Under what legal authority did the United States attack Iran? There is no congressional authorization for war with Iran. The War Powers Act requires the President to consult Congress before committing forces to hostilities. The authorization for the use of military force from 2001 was about Al-Qaeda. Iran is not Al-Qaeda. We are witnessing, once again, the executive branch unilaterally launching a war while Congress stands by as a spectator. Whatever your politics, this should alarm you, because a president who can start a war with a nation of 90 million people without legislative approval has the power of an emperor, not a president.
And where is Congress? Where are the voices demanding accountability? Where are the hearings? Where is the debate? We know where the defense appropriations committees are, they're rubber-stamping the next emergency spending bill. We know where the hawkish members are, they're on Fox and CNN cheering the strikes. But where are the institutional checks that are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral escalation? The founders of this country were explicit that the power to declare war belongs to Congress precisely because they feared a single executive dragging the nation into conflict for personal or political reasons. That fear is being realized in real time.
I want to return to Bahrauz Farahani's condemnation because it represents something the American public desperately needs to hear. Here is a man who has dedicated his life to opposing the Islamic Republic. He has presumably suffered for it, lived in exile for it. And when given the opportunity to celebrate an attack on the government he opposes, he condemns it. Why? Because he understands something that the war planners refuse to acknowledge: you cannot bomb a people into freedom. Every airstrike that kills an Iranian civilian creates 10 new supporters of the regime. Every act of foreign aggression validates the government's narrative that Iran is under siege and must unite. Farahani knows that this war will set back the cause of Iranian freedom by a generation.
Let's talk about what's not being reported at all. The humanitarian situation. Iran has 88 million people. Its medical infrastructure has already been degraded by years of sanctions that restricted the import of medicines and medical equipment. Now it's facing military strikes on what we can assume includes infrastructure targets. What happens to hospitals when the power grid is hit? What happens to water treatment when command and control facilities adjacent to civilian infrastructure are targeted? We know from Iraq, from Libya, from Yemen, that the humanitarian catastrophe of modern war extends far beyond the blast radius. Sanctions kill slowly. Bombs kill quickly. The combination kills comprehensively.
And the refugee crisis that a full-scale war would create is almost beyond calculation. Iran shares borders with Iraq, Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. A destabilized Iran could produce a refugee wave that makes the Syrian crisis look manageable. Europe, which is already politically fractured over migration, would face an unprecedented influx. Neighboring countries that are already fragile, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, would be pushed to the breaking point. The architects of this war have no plan for these consequences because they don't care about these consequences. They will be someone else's problem, borne by someone else's population.
There's another dimension we need to cover. Iran's response, striking U.S. bases across the Gulf, has fundamentally changed the strategic calculus for every country in the region. Saudi Arabia, which has been carefully building a normalization track with both Israel and Iran, now faces an impossible position. The UAE, which hosts thousands of American military personnel, just had its capital hit. These countries are being forced to pick sides in a war they actively tried to prevent. The entire architecture of Gulf security, built over decades, is being demolished in days. And for what? So that Netanyahu can avoid accountability and Trump can project strength? The disproportion between the political motives and the human cost is obscene.
Let me bring this to a point about information warfare, because it's happening in real time. Right now, social media platforms are being flooded with content framing Iran as the unprovoked aggressor. Footage of Iranian missiles is being shared without the context that they were retaliatory. Bots and coordinated influence operations are pushing the narrative that this is Iran's war, not America's. The platforms that promised to address misinformation after the 2016 election, after COVID, after every crisis, are once again failing spectacularly. If you're getting your information from algorithmic feeds right now, you are being manipulated. Seek out primary sources. Read the actual statements. Follow journalists on the ground. Do not let the war machine narrate this conflict for you.
Let's also address the nuclear dimension that everyone is dancing around. Iran does not currently have nuclear weapons. But what does a country learn when it watches what happened to Iraq, which gave up its weapons programs, versus North Korea, which developed nuclear weapons? It learns that nuclear weapons are the only reliable deterrent against American military action. If Iran survives this war without nuclear weapons, the first thing its military establishment will do is pursue them with renewed urgency. This attack hasn't prevented a nuclear Iran. It has virtually guaranteed one. The non-proliferation framework that took decades to build is being destroyed by the very countries that claim to champion it.
And that is the supreme irony that future historians will marvel at. The stated justification for confronting Iran has always been to prevent it from obtaining nuclear weapons. Yet every aggressive action, pulling out of the deal, imposing maximum pressure sanctions, and now direct military strikes, has strengthened the argument within Iran that only nuclear weapons can ensure survival. The moderates who argued for engagement have been proven wrong at every turn, not because engagement was flawed, but because the other side kept pulling the rug out. The hawks in Washington and Tel Aviv are not solving the nuclear problem. They are creating the very outcome they claim to fear.
As we close tonight, I want to speak directly to our audience. What you are watching unfold is not inevitable. It is not natural. It is the result of specific decisions made by specific people for specific reasons, and none of those reasons have anything to do with your safety, your prosperity, or your values. This war serves Netanyahu's political survival. It serves Trump's authoritarian ambitions. It serves the defense industry's quarterly earnings. It serves the oil industry's price manipulation. It does not serve the American people. It does not serve the Israeli people. And it certainly does not serve the Iranian people who are tonight huddling in their homes as bombs fall.
So here is what we are asking you to do. First, demand that your representatives in Congress invoke the War Powers Act and assert their constitutional authority over war and peace. Call them. Email them. Show up at their offices. Second, refuse the propaganda. When you see media framing that erases the fact that the US and Israel struck first, correct it. Share the actual timeline. Cite the sources. Third, support independent journalism, outlets like the ones we cited tonight, Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera, South China Morning Post. Reporters who are actually on the ground telling the truth at personal risk while the mainstream networks repackage Pentagon press releases.
Fourth, connect with anti-war organizations in your community. This is not a left-right issue. Libertarians oppose this war. Progressives oppose this war. Military families who don't want their loved ones dying for Netanyahu's corruption trial oppose this war. Build the broadest possible coalition and make it politically impossible for your representatives to stay silent. Fifth, remember that the people of Iran are not your enemies. They are people who want what you want, safety, dignity, a future for their children. Do not let warmongers turn your fear into their permission to kill. That is the oldest trick in the Book of Power, and tonight, as missiles fly over ancient lands, it is being played again.
This is Maya Clarity. We'll be here every night this crisis continues, bringing you what the mainstream won't. Stay informed. Stay critical. Stay human. The truth doesn't take sides, but it does demand witnesses. Be one. Good night.